The single most influential person in my life, 50 years old, and there has to be a person who's had the biggest impact, biggest influence. Take 0. So I recently turned 50 a month ago, and I've actually been thinking quite a bit over the last month. Like when you get to a half a century, you take inventory of your life, and I've thought about the whole course of my life, and I've got a 40-minute drive to get out to where my RV is, and now's as good a time as any to answer the question, who's been the most influential person in my life and why? So to start out, it's a hard question to answer, but I think it's important to answer it. There's been a lot of people in my life who've had positive and negative influence on me. Obviously, I'm talking about who's had the most positive influence on my life. My mom, before she died, had a profound impact on my life. My godmother, Libby Pinnell, she was one of my teachers. One of my best friend in high school was his mom. She took me under her wing and took me in as a senior in high school, and prepped me for college, and just gave me unconditional love and support. Had a huge, she had a huge impact on my life. Mrs. Hophan, her name is Phyllis Hophan, my second grade teacher. She was the first teacher I had when I moved to Lansing after my mom died. Huge role in my life. A lot of friends growing up had a huge impact on my life. I mean, just Gretchen Moore and Aaron Garrett, and friends from college, and my best friend, this guy Jim Squitieri. I've had just an enormous amount of people who have had a positive influence on my life. My professional mentors, Joe Rolfe, Mary Emily Slate, just lots and lots of people have had just a huge impact on my life. But outside of my children, outside of my ex-wife, and outside of Jesus, the person who's had the biggest impact on my life is my father, who I call my dad, my adopted father. His name's Jerry Ostrander. He was my half-brother's dad, or is my half-brother's dad, and he took me in after my mom died. So I'm just gonna lay out the reasons why, and one of the most important lessons that comes out of this is I was probably 35 by the time I realized just how much of a positive impact he's had on my life. It took that long for me to appreciate the impact he had. If you had asked me at 16 if he was a good dad, I would have been I would have been meh. I didn't like him very much when I was a teenager. So a little bit about my backstory, again, for my kids here, my grandkids. My mom's first husband, my mom Bonnie, her first husband was a guy named Mike Reynolds, and I have an older brother. She had a son with her first husband, and their relationship didn't work out, and she and her first husband separated. They were still married, and she still had his last name. My mom went out to California, I think to go visit one of her sisters or something, and she met my dad, who had just came back to San Diego from Vietnam. He was in the Navy. My father, my biological father, was a guy named Sammy Turner, and he was from South Carolina, musician. He's from basically his family settled the whole area right on the border between South Carolina, North Carolina. When you go back to those towns, Chesney, and like literally, it's all my relatives. It's my dad's family. It's fucking enormous. My mom met him. She went back to South Carolina with him. They were together. She got pregnant with me. Their relationship fell apart. She went back to New York, where she grew up, upstate New York. Her family's from the Auburn area. And she got connected with who I call my dad now, the guy who raised me. His name is Jerry, and they went to high school together. He was a couple years older than her, but they got together, and they were together actually when I was born. So my dad, who I call my father who raised me, he was in the delivery room when I was born. And he was the father that I knew. I don't remember this time, but he was the father I knew when I was a baby. My mom got pregnant with my brother Jerry about a year later, and then they separated, and then she had my brother. So for the next 6 years, my mom raised me and my brother Jerry through her 2 subsequent marriages, and my mom's personal life was a shit show. And although my mom wasn't a shit show, believe it or not, she was a wonderful mother. Her personal life was. So when my mom got murdered in February of '82, when we found her in the morning, that whole day was me and my brother Jerry at the police department. And we were in somebody's apartment for a while, and then we went to the police department. And then his father came and picked us up, Jerry. And he took me in. If he hadn't chosen to take me in, I would have gone to foster care or been taken in by a family friend, but he wanted to keep me and my brother together. And so he took me in, and he was in a relationship at the time with Maggie, and she had 3 kids. So the adopted family I grew up with was my half brother Jerry, his father Jerry, then his partner and her 3 kids, and we were all a family growing up. My father was a working class guy. So when I say my father, I'm talking about Jerry Ostrander, who raised me. The first thing he did that I didn't appreciate until much later in life was he made the decision to keep me and my brother together. We lived in a trailer. My dad worked really hard. He was in construction. He was always away, working. He'd be gone during the week and be home on the weekends. And the first thing he did was he took me in when he probably couldn't afford it, and gave me a family. So I grew up, even though I lost my mom, I grew up with a whole family, with a mom, a dad, brothers and sisters, and while we were poor, I never went hungry. I never had hunger for dinner. My dad worked very, very hard. My mom worked hard. But I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up in a time where, feelings weren't important. And even to this day, I don't think they're that important. I think they're a trick, honestly. But my father took me in, and that first decision he made to keep me and my brother together was probably one of the most important decisions anyone's ever made that had an impact on my life. The choice, he and my stepmom, my adopted mom, Maggie. In my real life, I don't call them my adopted parents, but because, whenever I say my dad, I'm talking about Jerry, and when I say my mom, I'm talking about Maggie. The decision they made to keep us together was a very profound decision on my life, a And at the time, I couldn't appreciate it. Obviously, I did not know how important that was. Growing up with Jerry Ostrander, he was a man's man, still is a man's man. He grew up on a farm. He started working when he was 12 years old. He volunteered for Vietnam so that his brother couldn't get drafted. He has a brother, my Uncle Jim, just the two of them. My dad volunteered so that Jim couldn't be drafted. Like, he's that kind of guy, you know what I mean? He didn't talk about Vietnam. There were a lot of people around him who had served in Vietnam, guys that he knew that were members of the local VFW and stuff, who were kind of gaming the system, you know what I mean? They were, when things started happening where, like, vets could start getting benefits, like basically not get paid not to work, and the argument was, they had PTSD from Vietnam. My father made a point to say to us when we asked him how come he didn't do that, he said, "I'm not a victim." And that's a slippery slope to go down. It's a slippery slope to say I'm not in control of my own outcomes. An incredibly important lesson I learned. My dad is the one who taught me that life is 90% doing what you have to do and 10% doing what you want to do. My dad's he's a man of very few words, but he's incredibly respected. Anybody who meets him, when there's always, you'll know with your parents, your parents have like basically two personas. The persona of them, and then the persona that their friends and other family have of them. And the persona that everyone else had of my father was, that's Jerry motherfucking Ostrander. And he's not to be fucked with. I can't tell you how many times I heard, "Your father is the toughest son of a bitch I ever met in my whole life." I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And the number of times I've seen, just how tough he is. My dad he's still alive. He's a man of principle, a quiet man, a stoic man who is a man of principle. But he was hard on us. He was really hard on me. And later on, he told me in life why he was so hard on me. And that's because he expected a lot out of me. He knew what my capabilities were. And he said that if a father doesn't push a son, no one will. And that's the role of a father, is to help a son, is to protect his daughters and to turn his son into a man. Help a son become the best man he can possibly be. But growing up, my dad was very, I don't want to say I wasn't afraid of my father, but I was definitely aware when he was around, and when he was around, he was in charge. And, kids were seen, not heard, or, we were seen, not heard. We were yes, sir, no, sir. He taught us to firm handshake, look somebody in the eye. Your actions reflect not just on you, but on the people who call you friend and family. I learned all those things from my dad, but most of what I learned from my father was not what he verbally told me. It was the things I saw him do. Like, first off, my dad raised 4 kids that weren't his. He raised 5 kids, supported a family of 7 on just his income. My adopted mom was disabled later on. She had a back injury. She ended up having to have a bunch of back surgeries, and eventually she couldn't work. In the early on, she worked. She worked in the insurance industry. But my mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom. She worked, but her work schedule was around our schedule. She worked in insurance, and then us kids' schedules. And then she went and worked for a chiropractic office later on when she had back issues. And then by the time I was 10 years old, she didn't work anymore. My father worked a lot. He worked 9 months out of the year. He was laid off for 3 months out of the year because he worked highway construction. But a lot of the things that I saw about my father was, the way he approached money. He treated money as a tool. Even though my dad was working class, he saw money as a thing that you use to make more money. He didn't see it as a thing that you just buy goods and services with. Number two, my father is the one who taught us the pillars of discipline, respect, and hard work. Like, my dad used to say all the time that the two worst things you can be in this world is lazy and a liar. And what I've learned later on in life is everybody lies. It's just the level to which, you know what I mean? Are they white lies? Are they half lies? Do people lie by omitting the truth? It's really hard to tell what a lie is sometimes. But it is but you know what it is when you see it. And when it comes to lazy, it's pretty easy. It's a lazy person is a person who is perfectly comfortable being in a group of people who are working and doing the least amount out of everybody. And later on in life, when my brother Chuck and I, my youngest brother, he and I worked in the salt mine together. We actually worked on the same crew. So he's the one who got me the job working at Cargill. He worked at Cargill first. And he was in production, so he ran equipment, and I was a mine support. I was shoveling belts. I was brand new. And we were in a crew of like 8 guys, and we all worked together. We drove out in the same truck together every day, and and I remember one night when we worked on second shift, and we were driving out together. I was probably 25, he's 22 maybe. And the guys on our crew, commented about how hard we worked. Like, what were your parents like? Jesus, you guys are... And we made the comment about how our father talks so much about the importance of hard work and how hard work translates into achievement. He would say that, but he also showed it. And one of the most important lessons I ever learned from just observing my dad was my father. One of the very first memories I have after my dad adopted me was he took me and my younger brother to the Groton Gun Club. So this is my dad shot trap. And at the time he shot a $500 Savage over under 12 gauge shotgun, trap gun, cheap one. And he would shoot in a Sunday league where you shoot 50 birds, 25 rounds twice. And my dad was, trap shooting is a rich man's game. It's not, it's an expensive sport to be in. And, I'm probably 8 years old. I probably just turned 8. And my father, they would post the scores for the league. And I remember that first Sunday he ran 50 straight. And they would put that in red, 25-25 red, and then everybody else would have black scores. And it was like my dad and one other person ran 50 straight out of the 100 guys who shot that day. And it was like right at the top of the list, And then we'd go to another gun club the next week, and it was like every week it was like my dad was shooting 49, 50, and he was always finishing first, second, or third in every single week. But these other guys were shooting $10,000 shotguns, and this is like 1982. And then we go, and winter ends, and the trap shooting season ends, and then Dad starts taking us he plays softball in the summer. So me and my brothers would go with him. He would take us. He would take the boys generally. We would go hunting, fishing, shooting trap, and going to softball tournaments with my dad. Right? That's primarily what we spent doing. And softball in the summer, all of a sudden, my dad's pitching, and he's hitting mammoth home runs. And it's like, and my dad's the best softball player on the field. And He's traveling all over the state in these travel leagues, and then when we would go to the bar after his softball game, the amount of the respect that everyone showed my father. Even though my dad, if you look at the two of us, I talk 100 times more than my dad does. My dad he's a he's a man of very few words. So what my dad did was he decided that he was going to focus all of his efforts on trap shooting. So he stopped playing softball. And he just started shooting year round. In the summer, the shooting season is a registered season where you travel all over the country and you shoot in enormous shoots with thousands of people. Whereas in the wintertime, they're like local gun club, maybe 6 local gun clubs are all within 20 square miles of each other. They'll enter into a league and you'll shoot at a different gun club each Sunday, but you only shoot 50 rounds. Then my dad decided to stop playing softball and take his shooting to the next level. So during the week, my father is working construction. He has me reloading his shells because he shot all reloads. All the best shooters in the world are shooting brand new shotgun shells. They have sponsorships and stuff. My dad saves up his money and he buys a Remington 3200 shotgun, which is a more expensive trap gun. And then he starts shooting registered shoots. So this is probably by 84, so 2 years after he adopted me. So I'm 9, 10 years old now. And my dad he was no longer in the top echelon. He was in that second level of shooter, not the elite level. And the amount of work my father put into becoming elite. Like I remember he started doing sports psychology. He started doing sports psychology when nobody was doing it. Like he'd put his headphones on at night and listen to these relaxation tapes that would help him, in theory, would help him focus it would help him focus on his shooting. And over the course of the next 2 years of shooting registered shoots, these big shoots, he ends up winning his first major title, the New York State Handicap Championship, I think in 1986 is when he won that. 86, 87, or 88, one of those three. And that's a big deal. You've got 1,000 people shooting. You win thousands of dollars for winning that event. You get your names in magazines. Your face goes on the plaque forever. So from there, my dad got a sponsorship from Beretta. I got to see him. Beretta came and sponsored him, and now he's shooting a double ELL. He's shooting like a $20,000 shotgun, and he's elevated his game again. And yet he's still this construction guy. All these guys he's shooting with are in these Class A $1 million motorhomes, and he's sleeping in his van. And I got to watch my father, the work, the patience, the effort, the diligence, the pursuit of excellence. I got to see that over and over and over again. By the early 90s, my dad, he had many championships under his belt. Now he's shooting with 4 guys. He shoots with the same 4 group of guys. Actually, one girl, Stephanie Sandler, Chris Vendel, who's one of the most famous trap shooters out of New York State. And over the course of the next 20 years, my dad becomes an elite trap shooter. And then in the 2000s, early 2000s, he gets elected into the New York State Trap Shooting Hall of Fame. And I got to watch that whole journey. How the pursuit of excellence is an additive venture. And how whenever my father, one of the things that always stood out to me was when my dad would shoot or say he didn't shoot well, he wouldn't be happy about it, but the blame would rest solely on him, and the solution would rest solely on him. Yet I would see other guys that he was shooting with, not necessarily guys on his team, but other high-level shooters. They're always coming up with some excuse for why they didn't shoot well. It was the wind, or it was a bad load, or the shotgun shell was loaded wrong, or it was never their fault. There was always an excuse. And my father never ever made excuses, ever. And I didn't realize how that behavior of watching him do that rubbed off on me. About how he, my dad used to say things like, if everyone likes you, you're doing something wrong. I cared a lot about popularity when I was in high school. I was a poor kid, but I was smart. My friends were kids that were in totally different socioeconomic classes than me. I never wanted them to come to my house, that kind of stuff, I cared about popularity. And then I didn't. And I didn't because my father said, if everyone likes you, you're doing something wrong. And the reason why is because in order for everyone to like you, you have to be the type of person who compromises what you believe to make them like you. And it was the old adage of stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I learned from my father the importance of taking inventory of who your real friends are. And those are the people who love you in spite of your worst. They see you at your worst and you're still endearing to them. They know what you really believe. They know how you handle stress, and they're still there. I learned that from my father. Another thing I learned from my dad was that I learned through observation was my parents, they never fought in front of us kids. I never saw it. Only one time do I ever remember my parents getting into a fight, and it was my mom yelling at my dad, and she was just hitting. My dad's he's a big guy, 6'3", 225, he's a big dude. And my mom, who was also, she was 5'11", but she was real thin, she was fucking just blasting him, hitting him in the face, pounding on his chest. And my dad just stood there and just took it the whole time. He didn't even seem to get angry. He just let her punch herself out on him. And I remember later we left the house and went hunting, and we were driving around looking for geese. That's what we used to do. We used to drive, we'd look for geese, set down somewhere, and then we'd put on a drive. My dad go hedgerow, me and my brothers would put on a drive, So there was a lot of driving and talking. And I asked my dad, why did he just stand there and take it? And he said, because she can't hurt me. Well, I'm not defending myself against somebody who can't hurt me. And he said, any man who would raise a hand at another woman is not a man at all. And, my biological mom died in an act of domestic violence, and, that really resonated with me. My father, I look now at the age of 50, and I look back at all of the achievements, and so much of it I owe to my dad. But if you had asked me at 25, I would never be able to tell you that. And if you'd asked me at 15, I would have told you fuck no. I hated my dad when I was a teenager. I respected him, but I hated him because we just butted heads. I thought he was, a boomer. I thought he didn't really understand how the world worked, and he didn't understand the pressures I was under as a teenager. I felt like he was insensitive to it, and the truth was, my father was right. The shit that I thought was important when I was 16, 17, and 18 was not important. Even in this day and age, people will tell you, you're feeling, we have to validate all feelings. No, we don't. I mean, you could tell people, I understand that you feel that way. That doesn't mean your feeling is valid or rational. My father didn't validate our feelings. He didn't validate all of them. And if my dad thought that the way we felt was irrational or inconsequential, he would tell us. And I'm thankful he did. I'm incredibly thankful. But it took 20 years for me to figure that out, because I hadn't lived as an adult. I didn't have a family. I didn't have the responsibility of paying the mortgage and groceries, and another one of the kids broke their leg wrecking their bike and I've got to pay those doctor bills. I didn't have that perspective, and I didn't know what I didn't know. But my father stayed the course. He learned from his mistakes. My dad would I don't want to say, well, he would apologize. But he came from a generation of people who didn't apologize. He learned from his mistakes, and every single day he tried to get incrementally better. Even when he ended up leaving my adopted mother. And he didn't do that until my youngest sister graduated from high school. Like, he was unhappy. She had spiraled with her back injury, and she ended up getting addicted to her painkillers. Her doctors, just basically accepted that she would have to be addicted to painkillers because of the pain she was in. And my father is an active person and traveled a lot and shot a lot, and the relationship deteriorated and fell apart. And he stayed until my sister graduated. And then he supported my sister while she was in school, and my brothers and sisters were all mad at him. I wasn't. I'm the oldest, and I kind of had at the time when he left my adopted mom, I was 24. I'd had a couple of relationships, so I had a little more perspective on it, I think. But my father stayed the course, and he always stayed true to his values. Not necessarily his opinions, but what he valued in life. And I got to see that. And my siblings saw that. And I'm so fucking unbelievably grateful for the man that he is. And the men he created. Me and my brother Chuck are all four. There are 5 kids, and 4 of us ended up way ahead of the curve. And that's a testament to how our parents raised us, because that was environment. Because 4 of us are not related. I mean, I'm not. 3 of them are, but I'm not. And in the world we live in, I look at my kids, and my kids are good kids, and everybody comments, how did you raise such good kids? And the truth is, I raised them the way my dad raised me. I took the things that I thought my dad did really well, and my mom did amazing things too, but this is about the person who had the biggest influence on me, and it was my father. And I took what I thought my dad did right, and I tweaked it. The thing that I did do, two things that I really changed was, number one, I created an environment in my home where everybody could make their case. It was never because I said so. It was, if you think I'm wrong, if you think my decision's wrong, it's your job to tell me, but it's your job to make your case for why I'm wrong. I'm not just going to accept it. And number two, I was overly loving with my kids. And that included things like, instead of my kids adopting my hobbies, I consciously, when I was like 16, chose to adopt theirs. I chose to show interest in the things they had interest in. But outside of those things, the way I raised my kids were the way my dad raised me. And, I had a chance to go see my dad. My dad had a stroke a year and a half ago. And me and my kids and my ex-wife, we all went up to New York and to go check on him. And this is the kind of guy he is. He didn't want anyone to see him in the hospital. So we were there to show him support, but he didn't want any of us to see him. He didn't want any of us to see him in that condition, not being able to speak. And so I ended up talking to him on the phone maybe a month later, and then he did speech therapy for like a year, and then I had a chance to go up and see him a couple of months ago, and we spent a couple of days together. And I made a point to tell my dad the impact that he's had on me, and I've done that. I'm 50 now. I probably really started doing that when I was in my mid-30s, when I really realized, holy shit, like, fuck. One of my favorite songs of all time is Unanswered Prayers by Garth Brooks. And that whole song is about, some of the greatest prayer, or the greatest thing God has done for us is not answering a prayer. It's the prayer he didn't answer. That's what was best for us in that moment. And that's what a parent does. Sometimes a parent has got to figure out a way to safely navigate you through not getting what you want, because that's what's best for you. And my father did that quite a bit. The old adage of life is 90% doing what you want to do and 10%, or 90% doing what you have to do and 10% doing what you want to do. That incremental improvement, making your choices based on values, not caring what most people think about you, has made all the difference in the world in my life. All the difference in the world. And when it comes down to influence, the vast majority of the credit goes to my dad, in terms of the greatest influence on me of all time. And if you had asked me 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. That's how my perspective has changed. All right. Hopefully that video at some point in my children's lives or my grandchildren's lives resonates. If you're the parent, stay the course. Know what your values are, operate in love with your children, and stay the course. Your values aren't going to steer you wrong as long as they're rock solid. And if you're the kid, understand you don't know what you don't know. And if you're anything like me, it is entirely possible that you'll be in your 30s and be thankful for the things that you absolutely hated in your teens and your early 20s. All right. Like, subscribe, comment down below. I don't even know if I'll post this one, but see you in the next one.